And there we go. Perfect. Guys, tap the screen. We're just waiting for Danielle to join. We're going, oh God, we have a lot to discuss today. Let me set up live goals. Keep tapping the screen, share the live. Give me 1 second to make this. I think we're casting. Sometimes it takes a while to catch up. There we go. Guys, keep tapping the screen, share the live. We're just waiting for the doctor, Danielle, to join. I also just got like 2 new monitors, so now I can be in Discord. I have to practice getting better at this though, so I will. I am having the longest week. My MAGA family is in town. Man, the stories I could tell you. It is 3 days of abs, 4 days. Today's day 4. But I really haven't seen them yet today, so I'm just saying I have survived 3 days of insanity. And it is just getting worse and worse. We're just waiting for Danielle to join. She has clinicals right up until 11. So she may be a couple minutes late. Oh, she just texted me. How's everyone's? Oh, that's what's missing. The chat is in a different. Okay, now I can see the chat. I was like, I feel like I don't know what's going on in this live. But it's because the chat was, I couldn't see the chat. I was like, I don't know what's happening. Someone said, how do I find you on YouTube? Yeah, it's A Girl Has No Name, just like the account I'm live on right now. It's A Girl Has No Name. This is live on YouTube. I know you can like watch on a bigger screen. Some people like to watch on YouTube, so you can definitely join and watch on YouTube as well. All of my lives I push to YouTube, and soon I'll be pushing them to other places as well. Can we please you take on H? Oh, I heard Jeff is going through a tough time. Sorry. I'm a little sleep deprived, so I think it's not funny. I'm laughing. This is the week of truly laughing so you don't cry. Yeah, no, I definitely heard that our friend HVAC is going through tough times. I don't know. He's having some sort of identity crisis. But since the election, I really have less patience with men going through identity crises. I mean, I have real problems now. Can you bring up a bit chat? Oh, it overlaps with chat. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can. I can also, maybe I can, hold on. It's just, if you guys understood what things look like in TikTok Studio, there's like a preview you can use, but ultimately, there's not that much room when you do mobile view, so. Okay, yeah, cool. Dani just texted me. She said she just needs a couple more minutes. She's just wrapping up. She's a little behind schedule. Yeah. I mean, I think this is good. And if it needs to be bigger, if we're looking at something, I think today, Dr. Dani is going to teach a lot. We're going to talk about femicide. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's a huge report that just came out by like the United Nations on femicide starting yesterday, and there's a 16. Well, I think it came out a little before that, but yesterday marked as the start of a 16-day campaign to end femicide, right? Which I was going through the report yesterday. Actually, I think maybe that's what we should do while we wait for Dani. We should go through some basic facts that I want to show you guys about it, because I think what I want to just get across are the definitions. So, what we're actually talking about. And this is something, when I lived in South America, there was a huge push because this is disproportionately affecting women and girls in South America, Central America. This was awful. So, they started actually legislating, right? Like, femicide is a crime in certain places around the world, right? Violent unalivings of women is a specific penal code with specific like enhancements in terms of penalties tacked on. We don't have that in the US. As a matter of fact, the way we track crime, it's very hard for us to actually track instances of femicide inside the US. It's very difficult. This is extremely, extremely underreported. Guys, tap the screen. Let's keep tapping the screen. Let's share the live, gift, subscribe. Please do subscribe. It is much appreciated. So I just want to read, I wrote down the definition just to make sure we're on the same side. And it's going to be hard to, I'm going to try to read this without also saying things that the algorithm won't like. So femicide is defined as intentional unaliving with a gender-related motivation. So it's different from homicide, where the motivation may not be gender-related. Femicide is driven by discrimination against women and girls, unequal power relations, gender stereotypes, or harmful social norms. It is the most extreme and brutal manifestation of violence against women and girls, which occurs on a continuum of multiple and related forms of violence at home, in workplaces, schools, or public spaces, including, which is the biggest problem we have in America, which will probably not be a surprise to any women in here, intimate partner violence, right? I mean, it's shocking when you look at the numbers of intimate partner violence inside the US. Sexual S harassment and other forms of S violence, harmful practices, and trafficking. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about when we talk about femicide. I just thought the UN released this deck, and I thought I would just go through these 5 things. Women and girls are most likely to be unalived by those closest to them, which is very true in the US, right? It's very different. Right? There are homicides that involve men. The difference that femicide is, it's familiar, right? It's people that are known to us that are either inside our familial relations or tend to be intimate partners. That's why it's so disturbing. And we'll go through this a little bit more, but in 2023, that's what this report centered around. Like, all the 2023 numbers on femicide have been collected, and then this report was released. And basically 51,100 women and girls worldwide were unalived by their intimate partners or other family members, including fathers, mothers, uncles, brothers. This means that on average, 140 women or girls are unalived every day, 140 every single day, by someone in their own family. Current and former intimate partners are by far the most likely perpetrators of femicide, accounting for an average of 60% of all intimate partner and family-related unalivings. Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, it is so disturbing. Going through this data last night, I was like, I don't even know how to talk about this stuff. It's that horrific. In many cases, only gender-related unalivings perpetrated by an intimate partner or family member are counted as femicides, right? But yet we know that gender-related unalivings take place in many contexts beyond the private sphere. Oh, the doctor's here. Yay, Dani! Welcome.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, I was just explaining femicide before you got here, so we could hit the ground running.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm just going into
While you
different
finish
types.
that, I still have you in my ears, but I'm going to grab my laptop so I can look up my own data.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So, and I just want to be clear. So the point is most femicides, or in some places where they're tracking femicides, this is simply a lot of times familial relations like mother, uncle, brother, father, unalivings, or intimate partners, right? So it's always has familial ties, but we know that, right, femicide is also related to other things in the private sphere, like grape, sex violence by someone unknown to the victim, linked to harmful practices as well, like genital mutilations, hate crimes, gender identity, sex orientation, things of that nature. So as we develop ways, and I feel like I've become an expert in the last 24 hours of how femicide is being tracked in different countries. And that's really the issue, right? We have a huge issue in the United States of not acknowledging femicide, not creating, a separate category for it, not adding judicial penalties, or enhancement penalties when it's occurring, right? It's hard to even track it in the United States. It's grossly underreported.
Felice and I were discussing this, and I was telling Felice that we don't even track this in the United States. So that's something that a colleague of mine asked really recently. He's a doctor, an MD doctor, and so we were Latino MD doctor. And of course, people of color get hit with this hardest, right? There's disparities here. So Black women and Indigenous women specifically, we know, are being unalived at a rate 3 times higher than white women are, right? And so one of the questions that he had, because he works a lot in diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, and one of the questions that he had is, well, if we're not tracking it in the United States as a country does not recognize femicide as an issue. We don't even recognize it. So to put that in contrast, the UK just this month declared a state of emergency over their rise in femicides. We don't even track it in the United States because the United States doesn't even recognize it as a thing. So then the question is, well, if the United States doesn't track it, then how do we know what the numbers are? How do we know that our numbers are really high? Well, because the UN tracks it, and then private companies in the United States, private research companies track it, right? But the US government itself doesn't care enough to track it. And I was telling Felice, to put this in comparison, Puerto Rico, which yes, is part of the United States, but is not a US state, right? In 2021, I went to Puerto Rico and I worked on a research group there reviewing the femicides on the island, because Puerto Rico declared a state of emergency in 2021 when one woman was dying every 3 days. So we had one woman dying by femicide every 3 days. Their rate had skyrocketed, and they hired a research team to come in and be like, why is this happening? Well, big surprise, one of the big reasons it was happening was because Hurricane Maria happened in 2017, and rates of poverty and stress and unemployment went up. And then we usually see rates of violence go up, right? That was a big contributing factor. But Puerto Rico declared a state of emergency when one woman was dying every 3 days. The UK, which is England, Scotland, Wales, and I think and Northern Ireland. There we go. England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. I'm like, I always miss Ireland there. They declared a state of emergency this month. UK just last week declared a state of emergency this month because one woman was dying every 3 days. In the United States, we have 3 a day. 3 a day who die. And not only has the US not declared a state of emergency, which influxes money, resources, and research into the issue, they don't even recognize it as a real thing.
I mean, I think it's like, what can you say? And I just want to, I like, just because, my father, I'm half indigenous Mexican, or my dad is half, right? So I'm a quarter from the Yaqui tribe, right? And I just find them, right? Black women in America are 3 times more likely to be unalived or about there. And I was also, wait, I wanted to find the statistic. Wait, maybe it was before. I just wanted to say, I was looking, it's much higher for indigenous women in America, right? It's almost 5 to 6
Extremely.
times. Yeah, it's 5 to 6 times. And it's interesting to me, like, they made this lovely infographic for Black women, and then immediately after that, I'm reading and it's saying, like, oh, it's 5 to 6 times. Yeah, here it goes. Men are unaliving Black women and girls at a rate almost 3 times higher than white women. For indigenous women and girls, the unaliving rate is 6 times higher. No infographic.
Yeah. And
No
we don't
info, no
even know
meme
the
for
real
them.
numbers.
Oh
Isn't
yeah.
that sad? Like, that's just an estimate because, particularly when it comes to Indigenous women, you want to talk about people who don't matter, numbers that aren't tracked. Indigenous women aren't tracked very well. They're the least, and that is true for maternal mortality as well, which we're going to be talking about later. We don't actually have good numbers on what the femicide or the maternal mortality rate is for Indigenous women because we don't care enough to track it. We don't care.
Yeah, and because we have relegated them to sort of autonomous areas known as reservations, right? It becomes that much harder to track. I know, like, what's going on, like, on the reservation where my relatives are from. I mean, it's a real problem. That's why you hear about MMIW, or maybe no one has heard. I'm hearing people in the comments say they've never heard about any of this, so maybe no one has heard. But missing and murdered Indigenous women, that's what MMIW stands for. It's the fact that the majority of women, Indigenous women, just disappear. Nobody ever knows if they've been unalived or not. No, there's no one's tracking anything. And so just to know this, that it's 6 times higher, I mean, what is the real number? Like, we know in Canada, they're still finding, mass graves related to the schools that they put Indigenous children in. So yeah, I just want to point that out. This is what they can figure out is going on, which is very little in the grand scheme of
Yep.
things.
And even just knowing, like, keep in mind, we've just told y'all we don't track these numbers very well, very closely. There's definitely a lot of data not being captured. But even of the data that's being captured, the UN did a review of how many femicides are happening across the US, right? Or not across the US, I'm sorry, globally. That are happening globally. So what they found is that like across the world, every 10 minutes, one woman or girl is being killed by femicide, right? Every 10 minutes. Now, of the 25 populous high income countries, right? Of the 25 most populous high income countries, the US makes up 70% of femicides. So if you take up those 25 most populous high income countries, right? We're talking about like Ireland, Britain, all of the high income, what they used to call, like, industrialized countries, the US accounts for 70% of femicides. And we don't even track the numbers well. That's not tracking the numbers well. That's not capturing all of them that are happening.
I
And
think I have, yeah.
still 70%.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
Felice is a graphic for it somewhere.
no, yeah, I mean, I was looking at the report they released. It's horrifying. Yeah, so on average, 140 women and girls were unalived every day in 2023. Again, think about this. These are our unalivers are known to us, right? These are partners that said they loved us, and these are our family members that allegedly love us. I just feel like I need to drag that home. But this is what we're talking about, though. Like, it's fascinating because we have underdeveloped countries, right? Like in Africa, let's say there's some underdeveloped countries, some overdeveloped, some developed countries in Asia. And then here we are, right? The Americas, 8,300, which is 3 a day, essentially. And you can see Europe is much lower. And then Oceania, that's Australia, if you guys don't know.
And someone said in the comments, like, what are the numbers for men? Well, this is not a comparable issue for men because this is women being killed because of their gender. Purely, that's what femicide is, right? It is women being unalived because of their gender. And so in the UN report, the way that they explain this and separate this, right, is men, like, because men will come into your comments, right? And they'll be like, well, more men are killed than women. The men's murder rate, you're not being murdered because you're men. You're being killed in assaults. Men are more often killed by strangers, people that are unknown to them. Also, men put themselves in very high risk and risky situations. We're talking about like bar fights. We're talking about getting aggressive with other men. We're talking about starting an altercation. Now, nobody deserves to be hurt. Nobody deserves to be unalived, right? I want to be really clear about that. But men are also a lot more likely to instigate violence in which they themselves are then unalived, right? So a motor vehicle accident, that doesn't count as an unaliving, right? It counts as a death, but we're not talking about an intentional unaliving. Men are most often unalived by other men. So this is still a male violence issue.
Women are being unalived primarily by men, and men are being unalived by men. Does anyone see a pattern here? Right? It's not, women aren't unaliving men in large numbers, right? It's quite rare, as a matter of fact. And again, I think the way after researching, going through all this data for the last 24 hours, kind of think of the private sphere, right? Just your unaliver is known to you. You're living in a home with them. You're interacting with them. This is someone at your family reunion. This is, you're celebrating anniversaries with this person. So this is not, and when we talk about homicide, right, can be random. It's not someone, we're talking about people in your immediate sphere, familial or intimate partners are unaliving you. But yeah,
right.
Men committing violence against men. Yeah, that's a whole other subject that probably needs to be addressed as well.
And it's not like, again, you don't hear about this very often.
Here's a good infographic for it, actually. This is good. So like 80% of total homicides, can you guys see this? 80% of total homicides are men unaliving men, or like, let's just say 80% of total homicides are men being unalived. 20% of total homicides, right, are female, right? And of those 20%, like, this is what we're talking about, though. This is the interesting part. The share of male and female homicide victims killed by intimate partners or other family members. And for women, it's 60.2%. For men, it's 11.8%. Like, we are always unalived by people that know us. I mean, if that's not eerie.
And it's also, I want people to know, I work a lot. Like, I just got back. I've worked overseas several times this year. I work overseas a lot, right? This is something that the rest of, like, a huge chunk of the world recognizes about the United States, right? So listen to some of these news articles. We're telling you, like, the US doesn't care about this. They don't even recognize it as a hate crime. They don't recognize it or study it as its own separate thing. Here are some of these articles. From 2015, so this is just 9 years ago, someone is finally starting to count femicides in the US. That's when they released this article, and it says the US doesn't track femicide specifically because we tend to just call these homicides or female homicides. Talks about how the US is just now finally starting to track it. From another place, guns and violence against women. America, I have to click on it. America's uniquely lethal intimate violence partner problem. Femicide is a growing issue in the United States. Is the US still too patriarchal to talk about their violence against women? Femicides in the US, the silent epidemic few dare to name. The silent epidemic of femicide in the United States. When I tell you that other people are writing about this and recognizing that US women are not okay, that we are not safe. When I tell you that, like, the majority of Europe is looking at us going, what is going on over there? why do you guys murder women like this? What is going on, right? Look at how the UK writes about us. Look at how other places in Europe write about us, other places that recognize femicide, that recognize that this is an issue. They're looking at the US going, y'all have an epidemic. Remember, the UK just last week declared a state of emergency because per their records, one person was dying every 3 days. We have over 3 a day, and we don't even recognize it as an issue. And they're looking at us being like, y'all are embarrassing. Because we are.
Yeah, I did some specific stats on the prevalence of femicide in the US, right? And Danny's completely right. These are third-party NGOs or whatever who are tracking it. This is not the United States government. They have little to no interest in how many women are being unalived due to specifically because of gender-based violence, right? So it's a global crisis, but I think this is perfect how they say it. They say femicide is a global crisis, but is very much a silent epidemic in the United States. According to Women Count USA, 1,104 American women and girls were lost to femicide in 2023. As of October 17th of this year, 607 women, as of 2024, right, have been killed because of their gender. Let me get into this because I think there's some interesting things here. In the United States, feminicide, the gender-based, that's what it is. The gender-based unaliving of women is often thought of as an issue affecting low-income countries, but this could not be further from the truth. A study on female homicide victimization among 25 populous high-income countries found that 70%, this is what Dani is talking about, 70% of all cases occurred in the US. That's us. Right here, 70% of all of it. To put that into perspective, on a global scale, we rank 34th for intentional female unalivings at a rate of 2.6 unalivings per 100,000. And we're ranking near, third world countries.
And a lot of times, like one of the countries that tends to end up pretty high on the list, or at least they have, and I'm pulling it up now before I embarrass myself and misspeak here. Yeah, so one of the countries that tends to have one of the higher rates tends to be Brazil. That's a country that comes up a lot in research. It's a country that gets talked about often. Brazil tends to have a high rate. Remember, rates are generally one per 100,000, which is what they are now. 1 per 100.
Did you freeze, Dani?
I did, yeah. Okay, like it's kind of going out. So Brazil tends to have one of the higher femicide rates. They're often put at the top of the list. They're often spoken about as the country that has one of the highest femicide rates. And this looks at 2024 and looking at data from the World Population Review. Brazil has a rate of 3.5. The US by comparison has a rate of 2.9, right? So this is number per 100,000. But guess what Brazil does? They recognize it as a hate crime, and you can actually be charged with femicide. It's an enhanced crime, right? So yeah, Brazil does have a higher rate, and you can unpack why and all of that at a different time, right? But this is also a country that officially recognizes it as an issue.
I was explaining when I lived in South America, like for a while, and I was going country to country. This was a huge issue, right? There were huge protests, women in the streets screaming like, "We want answers," and that's what came of that is actual legislation around femicide, enhanced penalties for femicide, beginning to track and acknowledge it's a problem. And here in the United States, the number one gross domestic product in the world, we don't seemingly care one way or another.
Now, someone did ask in the comments just a second ago about like Islamic countries. So we don't have all that, like I understand why people kind of make this assumption, right? So in the World Population Review, again, I am not saying these numbers are correct because it depends on how much you care about an issue and how closely you track it, right? Afghanistan has a rate of 1.3. Ours is 2.9. 1.3 compared to 2.9. I'm not saying it's accurate. I'm just saying that's what it is right now. India, which is often a country that people think about for having high rates of violence against women, 2.5. Their rate is 2.5. Ours is 2.9. Right? And then Felice was saying something about African countries where there's a lot of places that have like a lot of war, things like that. We see femicides go up. Why? Well, because women are pawns in war, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's interesting also. It depends on the part of the world. Like Africa and Asia, we're seeing more familial unalivings, right? By like a parent, an uncle, which they normally call honor unalivings, right? You disgrace your family in some way and they will unalive you. Like it's the honor of the family depends on it. Where in America, the largest percentage of ours seems to go unnoticed and uncared about seems to be intimate partner violence, right? So it's interesting. It depends on where you are in the world. Climate crisis, climate refugees are one. War refugees, right? When women are moved around the world because of displacement, right? I want this interesting set, and I don't know if I actually screenshot it or not. I'm not going to try to go through and look for it, but they were giving examples of when you become a climate refugee, the instances of grape and unaliving skyrocket, right? And one of the examples in the UN women's study was after Hurricane Katrina, like the incidents of grape in Mississippi, where everyone was relocated as refugees, went up exponentially, right? Like women were being picked off. So yeah, like when you become a refugee for whatever reason, whether it's climate, whether it's economic hardship, like what happens when the United States is sanctioning South American countries, they can no longer survive. They have to make dangerous journeys, or it's because of war. When women become displaced or disproportionately homeless, then we are more vulnerable and are attacked more. And we see that
And
a
we
lot in the
know,
trans community, right? The percentage of the trans community who are homeless, right, and fall into the femicide category, right? The vast majority of femicides are of let's say homicides in the trans community are actually femicides, right? They're feminine presenting trans people.
and we know that speaking of that, like climate change and things like that, so they just had a meeting about a climate change deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Vatican joined Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Russia over blocking the climate change deal. And it was an agreement that would have provided more support for women and girls because 80% of those affected by climate change are women and girls. 80%. When we talk about people that are displaced, losing their job, people that are responsible for acquiring resources for the family, water, food, meals, we're talking about women, right? So 80% of those affected by climate crisis are women. And they were supposed to have an agreement that was going to influx more money to help women and girls displaced by climate change. And that was blocked. That agreement that would have given more funding to offset the effects of climate change on women and girls was blocked by the Vatican, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Russia. Why did they block it? Because in the agreement, they included LGBTQ issues. They included queer women. They included trans women. And they blocked it because they didn't want them included. So if you think that this trans investigation stuff, this anti-trans stuff, if you think it's not going to affect you, it does. It does affect you because these extreme right-wing people won't even give funding to help people being displaced and hurt by climate change because they hate LGBTQ people so much.
This is this is the stuff which I find fascinating. The transgender community is also profoundly affected by femicide, especially trans women of color, right? 2021 was the deadliest year globally for unalivings of trans people, and 96% of those victims, 96%, because I didn't want to say a stat without remembering what it was, of those victims were trans women or trans feminine people. right? I mean, it's scary. Of the known cases of anti-trans unalivings from 2013 to 2018, approximately 1 in 6 or have suspected of having been committed by an intimate partner. And I was reading more into this and I found it fascinating, like the variety of factors of why, right? And this is kind of details some of that, right? With trans people experience police violence at a 3.7 times higher rate, right? So do you call the authorities if you're just as likely to be assaulted by the authorities? Do you call the authorities? Trans women may be hesitant to come forward and report abuse due to institutionalized transphobia. Right? I mean, this is they have nowhere to turn. Essentially, they may be wrongfully denied treatment or service at domestic violence shelters because of their gender identity. So, and according to a 2015 U.S. transgender survey, 22% of trans people were verbally harassed, physically attacked, or denied equal treatment or service at a domestic violence shelter or rape crisis center. So, I mean, we're talking about a group. We're arguing about whether or not they can use the restroom, let alone get help when they are attacked. I mean, this is the reality.
And I think that we have to recognize that where do we expect trans people to turn to? Right? Like if they're in a situation where they're being hurt or their partner's hurting them and it's unsafe for them, where do you want them to go? A lot of shelters won't take them, right? They won't take them. They can't call the police because they're not going to be supported, and they are likely going to experience some discrimination if they're not outright hurt by the police themselves, right? Where do you want them to go? They're also likely to lose their health care and lose their job and all these other things. Like we're talking about layers and layers and layers. So, and then add kids to the mix, right? Do they have kids? So did their family disown them? Do they have anyone else to turn to? What does their community look like? Right? And if you're in a red state, if you're like in Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, this isn't looking good.
Yeah, and think about I thought this part was super interesting, right? Like, so think about it. I mean, I think a lot of women in here have been in some sort of abusive or coercive relationship, right? So think about if that's your situation, which Dani just described, you don't have outlets for help, right? So trans women are facing and people are using coercive control over them to maintain power and manipulate their victims, such as threatening to out them, telling them they're not a real woman, right? Withdrawing hormones or medication, right? Because like I said, a huge percentage of trans women are homeless, right? They are relying on an intimate partner who oftentimes may be abusive or coercive to survive in society, to have a roof over their head, to have medication they need, right? Threatening to call the police on them, right? Additionally, with nearly 1/3 of trans people, okay, so that's the number, it's 33%. 1/3 of trans people are experiencing homelessness. Trans women may be financially dependent on their abuser. This is not just unique to trans women, right? Dani and I talk about this all the time. How many women are in relationships because of financial dependence?
Yeah.
Nobody can live in a one-income household anymore. If you're the prey gender of a species, right, you often find yourself being coerced or controlled for fear of not having resources.
And if you're the person in a position of power, you know that. And you know to exploit that. You know to hold that over somebody's head, right? And when you add things like kids to the mix or something like that, do you want to leave your kids behind with that person? And it's really easy for that person to be like, well, you don't have any money. You don't have any income. No judge is going to give you custody. Where you and the kid's going to live? How are you going to get an apartment? Right? And so you stay because the alternative is leaving your kid behind with this person.
Absolutely. If you can't provide for your child, who does custody go to? Not you. Not you. Which I thought, I mean, and then this is what you were touching on. which is so unique to the US, right? Like this is not
Mm-hmm.
happening in other places because of pew pews, right? Because anybody can go anywhere and get a pew pew. Women have a unique issue in femicide, specifically in America. The number of women unalived in the US is steadily rising. 2,997 women were unalived in 2019 compared to 1,691 in 2014. Firearms consistently contribute to the fatality of crimes related to intimate partner violence. So if your partner, right, uh, has access to a weapon, has a weapon in the house, they are 5 times more likely to unalive their victims. Every month, an average of 70 women in the US are shot and unalived by an intimate partner.
And women in the US are also this, I believe are you looking at the Population Institute data? Or no, that's
A sanctuary for families.
Sanctuary for Families. I recognize the website. I'm like, that's not them. So the Population Institute and a lot of the Sanctuary for Families is summarizing a lot of the Population Institute and the UN data on that website. And so the Population Institute, for their data, found that women in the US are 28 times more likely to be intentionally unalived by a pew pew than women in peer countries. So if we're talking about the other high income countries, the US has one of the highest femicide rates, right, of all high income countries. 70% that occur in those top 25 populous countries occur here. You are 28 times more likely to be unalived in that way than if you were to live in Britain, Ireland, Hungary, Poland.
Yeah. This stat says in 2015, 92% of all women unalived with pew pews in high income countries were from the United States. 92%. Like this is a problem unique to America, right?
And then we talk about, like, someone had said men's insecurity and things like that, right? We know rejection violence is a thing. And rejection violence occurs when you say no to a man. So if a man comes and he asks you out or he asks you for his phone number, for your phone number or whatever, and you say no to him, or he tries to get you to sleep with him and you say no to him, rejection violence is so common. It has a name. Like, we named it in research because it's such a big thing that we can study it. If it was this anomaly that happened very occasionally, we wouldn't have a name for it. We wouldn't have whole studies on it. Masculine insecurity and masculine identity crisis. It's a thing that we study. It's an actual thing that we study. And masculine identity crisis is on the rise right now. Why is masculine and identity crisis on a rise? Well, because men used to get their identity through dominating women. Because their entire identity used to be protect, provide, get money, bring it home, dominate women. And now they don't have that anymore. Now they're all angry because women outnumber them in undergrad, graduate, medical school, law school. Women don't need them anymore. They have to be likable. They have to be wanted. And guess what? They're not very likable, right? So now we're getting these rises in masculine and identity crisis, which brings a rise in male violence. Because when men have an identity crisis, they have two options. They can either redefine their masculinity, right? They can go to therapy, they can heal, they can become emotionally intelligent individuals and redefine what this teeny tiny box of masculinity means and make that box so much bigger and so much healthier. Or they can go to the manosphere, they can double down on their violent masculinity, and then you start to get reactionary violence out of that. It's not the same as rejection violence. Rejection violence comes from you specifically rejecting a man. But this reactionary violence is men reaching and being violent in order to regain what they see as their masculinity that's being lost. How's it being lost? By women simply existing as autonomous human beings.
And it starts as verbal, right? I mean, I feel like I've experienced this at different levels, right? It's like when a man you are dating loses control of you, feels emasculated by you, right? They start to try to punch down verbally, right? Like put you back in line, let you know. I've experienced this in so many different phases. It's like I can see it playing out. And that's the point about femicide, right? Like, what can we do to stop it? It's about early detection. It's about recognizing the warning signs, right? Because essentially it's just a spectrum. It layers on itself. It starts with verbal, you're verbally abused, you're put down, they're trying to put you back in their place. We talked about, oh, I left it in the room. I found my Bell Hooks copy of A Will to Change, which is a Black feminist writing to essentially men in the patriarchy and asking them to recognize, like, hey, you're the first victims of this, right? You were damaged into killing off your empathy, and then you and then you damage other people, right? Like it's the patriarchy's like shit rolls downhill. Whenever you feel emasculated, go find someone else to emasculate to remind yourself that you're a male. Right. And that affects women disproportionately, right? Men start by damaging each other, emasculating each other, and then shit rolls downhill. And I feel like I've definitely been caught up in that so many times. Someone said that's why I'm part of the 4B movement. You and me both, for sure. I just loved this Sanctuary for Family site. And this is geared towards New York, but they also have resources and links to other places. So if, again, I just thought I'd put something up for resources, but if anyone needs help, there's tons of national hotlines, resource lines that you can reach out to. Sanctuary for Families has links to them. I suggest looking into it because yeah, it is a cycle. It does not stop. In my personal experience, you have to make it stop, right? And that's the sad part for women, I think, is the most dangerous time in a woman's life is when they're trying to leave, right, an abusive relationship of some sort. You're actually now in the most danger. Nothing's more emasculating than leaving.
Yep.
So
That
what
if
is
your partner who you're supposed to have domination and control over leaves you, you suddenly don't have control over it anymore. And if your masculinity and your identity is wrapped up in that, now you've got a crisis.
someone asked what the 4B movement is? It's uh violence, many things are happening in Asia, right? It originated in Korea, in Asia, but it's spread all over Asia. It's a movement that basically says, I support I think it's like 6B4T by this time, like that was just banned in China. It has to do though with 4Bs have to do with like, you're not going to date men, you're not going to marry men, you're not
Is a reaction to this super anti-feminist movement in South Korea. Now their birth rates are absolutely plummeting. And rather than saying maybe we need to do something about the men, birth rates are plummeting across the world right now. And rather than doing something about the men, people are trying to figure out how to coerce women into having more babies. So now we have this 7B movement coming out. And the 7B movement is no dating men, no sex with men, no marrying men, no babies with men, no talking to men. Now, what that means is, yeah, it could mean like no talking to men, but generally what they mean is stop wasting your very precious time and
Preach.
energy on arguing with men on the internet
Preach.
who aren't going to listen, who are just from the manosphere and they don't care about what you have to say. That's your precious time and energy, and you're giving it away for free.
Wait, can I
Right?
add
So it's
one
don't
thing?
speak
Can I
with
add
men like
one
that.
thought? Yeah, well,
Mm-hmm.
that too, for sure that like don't waste unless it's a good faith conversation where someone's open to listening and learning, don't have the conversation. But furthermore, I see not talking to men as like I have many male friends who are Republicans who voted for Trump, or I thought they were my friends. I'm reevaluating all of this, but like want to spend time on the phone with me, getting my, you know what I mean, advice, emotional labor, time, like these, who then go and vote against my right to exist. As a pansexual woman in society. So I think it's about what you need to think about is your time is precious. Time is a finite resource. Don't allocate it to people that don't care if you live or die.
Yep, exactly. So don't waste your time on that, right? And like I'm a professional bodybuilder. I do a lot of stuff in the gym. I have men come to me all the time. Can you help me work with workouts? Can you teach me about nutrition and diet? No. No, I'm not doing free labor for you. Google it. Look it up on the internet. Learn the same way we all had to learn, or pay me to do this labor for you, right? No more free labor for these men, right? Emotional or otherwise. And then the other two B's to make 7, because we're at 5. The other two B's are no buying misogynistic products, right? So we're not paying into the pink tax. We're buying men's deodorant. We're buying men's razors. We're buying men's shaving cream. We're not paying into the pink tax.
Explain the pink tax, because I don't think everyone knows what that is.
So the pink tax is the last one, just to go through. The last one is B helps B. So it's women help women. It's women lean into your communities. Lean into your communities of women. Lean into it. Do you have a landscaper? Is it a male owned company? Fire them. Hire a woman owned company. You need a plumber? Find a woman. Look for a woman. You need an electrician? Find a woman. Because we're all sick of having these male service workers make us feel uncomfortable in our own freaking home anyway. Right? So help other women. That's B helping B. Now the pink tax is if you ever go to the store and you look at like the Venus razor and you put it next to like the men's razor, both razors have 4 blades. Both razors have that like, I don't know, this is essential oils surrounding the razor, whatever they tell us it is, right? It's probably just chemicals that are going to kill us, but whatever. So that pink razor is going to cost like $1 more. That shaving cream that's marketed to women is going to cost like 70 cents more. And I know that 70 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but there's good data out there that shows that women spend X amount more per year purely because products marketed to women that are pink, that have flowers, or they're just marketed to women cost more money. So we're not buying into that anymore. We're going to buy the male Dove deodorant. We're going to buy the male shaving cream. We're going to buy the men's razors, right? Now, my hair care products are different. I will spend a lot of money on that. Okay. But you get the point. Find women doctors. Yeah, they're better. Someone said a comment. Women doctors are better. You're less likely to die if you have a female surgeon, and you're more likely to get a quicker diagnosis if you have a female doctor. Sorry about it. And that's if you're a male or a female.
Surprise. No, and we're going to get into like maternal mortality after reading like these 5 cases that have been, reviewing them this morning that have been reported on by ProPublica. Yeah, it does seem like I'd much rather appeal to a woman when I have to fight for my life now, apparently. When I need a DNC, I'm not going to be provided. I'd much rather be talking to a woman, right? Like, I think we have a better chance. Because
Yep.
I mean, it's quite disturbing what's going on. Do you want to move into maternal mortality? We'll talk more about
Sure, one of my favorite
7B.
topics.
I know. It's God, I'm so disturbed. Here, let me. Oh, it should update in a second. I'm not on that page. Sometimes casting takes a while to get. There we go. There we go. So I thought we're going to start in Texas, right? There have been 3 cases reported on. Is it Nevada? I don't know.
Nevaeh.
Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. There've been three, and Dani's a doctor, so she can explain this much better than me. But I thought we'd go through the cases in Texas. These are the preventable unalivings of women in Texas, right? Since the Dobbs decision that we know of, right? As of from what I've read, they're still researching the 2021 cases, the immediate cases that happened right after the Dobbs decision and SB 8.
Yeah, so these Nevaeh Crane, or is it, yeah, Crane, Crain. I have to close my eyes, I think, to like spell it out.
All of these articles, all of these studies, the UN study, the specific stuff on femicide in the US, all of these articles, everything is in the outline in the Discord. If you want a link, just say, or an invite to the Discord, just raise your hand in the chat and someone will get you one. Or this is a TikTok live, or this is a TikTok account, a business account at Felice Navidad Live. You can message it and ask for a link that way as well. But yeah, everything we're going over, you can find in the outline today in the live sources section.
So I think that this is a really interesting case, particularly because it's an 18-year-old. It is a young, white, traditionally, conventionally pretty 18-year-old who was pregnant. And she went to, there she is, Nevaeh Crane, and she and her family were pro-life. She and her family were supportive of the abortion bans. They were supportive of the abortion bans in Texas because they didn't think that they would be affected by it. They thought that they would never ever need an abortion in the first place. And if they ever needed emergency care, I want you to pay attention to that because we're going to come back to that idea later. The anti-abortion movement is currently in a language battle where they are redefining abortion. So if you read this article, you're going to see anti-abortion people, Republicans, and I want you to pay attention because they only ever say there's no law that outlaws life-saving care. They're not saying life-saving abortions because they believe that abortions are never needed to save somebody's life. And that's how we get cases like this. We get cases like this because they'll say, well, we're not going to outlaw life-saving care. That doesn't mean abortions. They're specifically not saying abortion on purpose because they don't believe that abortions are life-saving care. So then Nevaeh Crane goes septic. And I don't know any other way to say this. She's allowed to die. She is allowed to die because they could have easily saved her. They could have easily potentially saved the fetus as well, but they didn't because nobody wanted to touch her. And that's how this is happening. That's how this is happening across the US. That's happening right here where I am. So I'm on the border of Alabama and Florida. Urgent cares in Alabama are refusing to see pregnant patients. If pregnant patients come to a standalone urgent care, they're refusing to see them and saying, you have to go to an ER attached to a hospital because we don't want the liability. Because big hospitals, big ERs attached to big hospitals, guess what they have? Big lawyers who are going to make this decision. It's not the doctors making these decisions. In order for you to provide Nevaeh with an abortion in Texas, you as a doctor, the hospital's going to have to know about it. And guess who's going to have to approve that? Because you're going to need an OR or a procedure room. You're going to need a nurse. You're probably going to need some kind of nurse anesthetist or something like that if you're putting them under like a twilight sleep. Otherwise, you can do a cervical block, but like, that's going to suck if that's all you got. So you need resources to provide this service. Whose resources are you using? The hospitals. Because you're a clinician contracted or hired by that hospital. You are using that hospital's resources to provide care. Otherwise, you have to have your own clinic with your own resources, and that's very expensive. It can be done, but it's expensive. Doctors do it, but it's expensive. So you're at a hospital. You have Nevaeh come in. She needs an abortion. That's probably going to have to be cleared through that legal committee, isn't it? So a bunch of admin and lawyers are going to sit around going, can we legally provide an abortion right now? If we do provide it, is the state going to come after us? Are they going to sue us? Are they going to sue this doctor? Are we going to be on the line? Are we going to hit the news, right? You're just not going to provide it. You're not going to provide it until the absolute last available minute, until it is clear that unless you provide this abortion, this person's going to die. And that means that people are going to die. It means you're going to get it wrong sometimes and people are going to die. And I want people to understand how quickly this can turn. Sepsis is not a joke. Sepsis is an immediate emergency. And the reason it is an immediate emergency is because you can tank in 10 minutes and your organs can be failing. And it's really hard to bring you back from that. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to start giving you IV antibiotics and you're going to be okay. No, this causes life-altering issues in the body, even if you survive. If you survive. And sepsis has a really high mortality rate, right? So like, it's not a wait and see situation. We don't wait and see with sepsis. We act immediately because you can unalive very, very quickly. And that's what's happening in these circumstances. When you see cases like Nevaeh, or we're going to talk about Georgia in a little bit, you're going to see cases like Amber Nicole Thurman. These people are dying because it can go south so quickly. And that's why we don't need people in legislation legislating medical care, because they don't understand or know these things. And even when they do, they don't care. They plan for people dying like this.
I think it's helpful to note too with Nevaeh Crane. I mean, this girl, it was the day of her baby shower. She's feverish, vomiting, right? She's got blood staining her thighs. That's when she went to the first hospital. She went to 3 hospitals, right? She died in the 3rd hospital. Just to be clear, she tried 3 times to get help and they sent him away, or they sent her away 3 times, like, and her boyfriend and her mother. 3 times. Like, I don't want it to be that she just went one place. I mean, this is a pro-life supporter who's like, I want my baby to live. They knew very soon that her baby wasn't in fact going to live, but because there's the fetal heartbeat, they adopt, apparently in Texas, the wait and see method, right? Like, you've got to just deteriorate more. You've got to bleed more. We can't do anything until there's not a fetal heartbeat. So maybe you'll live, maybe not. Go home, come back, go home, come back, and die here. Like, that's how I would describe what happened to this girl.
So even before the Dobbs decision, because I have data on maternal mortality, y'all. It's one of the things I lecture on the most and teach about the most. So even before the Dobbs decision, which is the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, which happened in 2022, the Commonwealth Fund did a study. So if you remember before the overturn, there were a lot of abortion bans coming down, restrictions, right? We'll call them restrictions. Texas famously in 2021 banned all abortions with their ability to sue somebody law, right? That was SB 8. So, sorry, there's questions coming in and I'll get to them in the comments. Otherwise I get distracted, y'all. So the Commonwealth Fund did a review of the states that had effectively banned or heavily restricted abortion. So effectively banned is like Texas, right? You make it so hard for someone to get one that they're effectively banned. Maternal mortality is defined as death during pregnancy or exacerbated by the pregnancy or within 42 days postpartum. Why 42 days postpartum? Because that's 6 weeks, right? That's 6 weeks postpartum. So states that had effectively banned or heavily restricted abortion in 2020 had a maternal mortality rate 62% higher than states that maintained access. And that was before these states had restrictions after the Dobbs decision. That was before.
That's God, that's terrifying. I mean, literally before and since it's only gotten worse, right? What I'm
Now
getting
it's
this
gotten
cancer.
worse, right? We're definitely going to see maternal mortality go up. Texas itself, and I know Felice has this screenshot somewhere. Texas itself has seen, I think it's a 22%, and this is off the top of my head. So if this stat comes up and I'm a little bit off, my apologies in advance. But I think Texas itself has seen a 22% increase in maternal mortality alone since the Dobbs decision. 22% is not a small amount, y'all. And then we're seeing places like Idaho, for example, that has now lost about a third of its OBGYNs. So in the entire state of Idaho, which is a big state, like surface area wise, big state, right? We're down to like 210 OBGYNs for the entire state. They life flight about one woman every other week to Washington in order to get abortion care because abortions are illegal in Idaho. Now, when we're talking about the South, we're talking about Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, right? You can't just life flight someone to the next state over because you're talking about states and states and states away. But Idaho is in a unique position. Idaho is on the border of multiple states that protect access. So why haven't we heard about women dying out of Idaho, but we've heard of women dying out of Texas and Georgia? Because doctors in Idaho, rather than letting their patients die, are putting them on a life flight helicopter to Washington. Cost you about $30,000 to $40,000 out of your own pocket, by the way. Most health insurance does not cover life flights, so you're paying out of pocket. We are now, as experts, recommending that all pregnant people in the state of Idaho get supplemental life flight insurance. It's additional insurance that you have to pay for on top of your health insurance, but we are recommending, our expert opinion is that all pregnant people in the state of Idaho need to add on life flight insurance. Because if you end up in a position where you need a life-saving abortion, they're going to life flight you to Washington. And we're doing about 2 women a month right now. Now, I would rather have you life flighted to Washington than die like they do in Texas and Georgia, but you're still going to come out with a $30,000, $40,000 bill for it.
It's so disturbing. And think about it, there's nowhere to take people in the South. Think how long the flight is. There's nowhere to go. That's the nature of a maternal desert. You're trapped. That's why it's so great. I mean, I'm so happy for Misery passing the right protections for abortion because it's one state, right, near the complete maternal desert of the South where people can be moved to. Someone asked insurance costs for life flight. I don't know if there is insurance cost. What insurance pays for life flights? You must have some serious insurance.
So I do think that there are some health insurance policies that cover it, probably. I am unaware of any specifically, right? But the cost of life flight depends on mileage. So life flight depends on the mileage and it depends on what resources you use when you're on the helicopter, right? So if I have to use like banana bags and things, banana bags are like rehydration bags, like saline solution bags and things like that. If I have to use several of those because you've lost so much blood, you're going to pay for those. If you're all the way on this side of Idaho and I got to get you all the way over to Washington, or you're dead center in the middle and I got to get you all the way over to Washington, you're going to pay per mile. And you're going to pay more money than someone that's right on the border of Washington because it's more miles for that helicopter to fly. So I looked up what the average cost of life flight is in the United States. Again, depends on mileage and how much resources you use. Anywhere between $12,000 and $50,000 for a life flight. $12,000 to $50,000. Now they're not going to life flight you back to Idaho, right? They're just going to life flight you to Washington. You got to figure out how to get home, but you're going to get your care.
Jesus. I thought this one is her name Joseli Barnica. I think she's Spanish, so I thought it
I
might
thought
be
it was
Joseli.
Joselli,
Jelicelli. No, it could be.
Joselli, but I don't want to say it wrong.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure either. That's why I was asking. So you probably would know better than me. So I just thought it was interesting. Like, she was one of the ones directly told in a Texas hospital, they couldn't act until the fetal heartbeat stopped. I mean, is she the one that was dilated to like the size of a baseball and that, opening her up to sepsis basically?
Yeah, so I think so. And y'all, this is how bad it gets, is like there have been enough now that I get their stories crisscrossed. Right? There's been enough people now that have died that I get their stories crisscrossed. But I believe, if I have this correct, yeah, because she didn't deliver for 3 days. So if you think about the uterus, hold on. I have plushies for this exact purpose. Here's your uterus, right? So if you think about your uterus, this is your cervix. You can't see it, but there's a little band right here at the top. This is your cervix. This is the vaginal canal, right? This is closed. When you're pregnant, if anyone's heard of like the mucus plug, or people will be like, oh, I know I lost my mucus plug. That's because that is a closed environment, right? So this is what am I trying to say? It's a secure environment. It's void of infection, right? The word that I want is like gone from me right now. So if anyone comes up for it, kudos.
Sterile.
But thank you. There it is. This is a sterile environment, as sterile as you can get, right? Baby's floating around in a sack in there, right? So if you have, that's why an amniocentesis comes with risks, right? An amniocentesis is when we put a needle in there and we remove, right? It's a test done to see if there's any abnormalities. It comes with risk because we're going into a sealed, sterile environment and we're introducing a needle, and that could cause issues. Usually doesn't, right? It usually doesn't, but there are risks for this reason, right? You don't have to have an amniocentesis. Usually it's only done if we think that there's an issue. Now, once that cervix dilates and it opens, or if you have what we call PPROM or PROM, which is preterm premature rupture of membranes, or premature rupture of membranes. If you're before 24 weeks, it's PPROM. If it's after 24 weeks, it's PROM. That now is no longer a sterile environment, right? Because you're leaking amniotic fluid. That's not a sterile environment. You're at risk for an infection, which puts you at risk for sepsis. Sepsis is one of the top 3 leading causes of maternal mortality. So she had, I believe it was PPROM because she was 17 weeks, if I have it correct. She was 17 weeks. Her cervix was dilated.
Yeah.
Obviously, the more you're dilated, go ahead.
It says here, yeah, let me just paint a picture for everyone that I had to paint for myself earlier today. But lying in the hospital with her cervix open wider than a baseball left her uterus exposed to bacteria and placed her at high risk of developing sepsis. Infections can move fast and be hard to control once they take hold.
Yeah. They are hard to control once they take hold, especially if it's gone, again, septic, a systemic infection. So they left her there like that 3 days. Y'all, I have had people in the hospital with sepsis and you can't even touch them because they're in so much pain. It's like their skin hurts. They're writhing in pain. This is torture. This is abject torture, period. And if you ever talk to someone's partner that has seen them like that, they're shivering, they're shaking, they're begging, they're like, please cover me up. I'm so cold. I'm so cold.
That's
I'm
what
so
her
uncomfortable.
husband says in this article, that he was trying to lay on top of her to give her body warmth. He did not know what to do. She was in so much pain. It hurt for her to touch, but he was trying to just hover over her to try and keep her warm.
It is horrendous. Horrendous. And then you'll hear a bunch of anti-choice people. Someone asked in the comment, is there lawsuits? Well, Nevaeh Crane's family did try to sue the doctors in the hospital. Not a single lawyer would take the case. Not a single lawyer would take the case because the doctors were bound to follow the law of the land. We regulate healthcare all the time, right? It's just that we're regulating this healthcare now, and we didn't used to. So, no, There's not lawsuits because this isn't malpractice, because you put a doctor in an impossible position. If they go this way, they're going to get charged with unaliving charges, essentially, because you can face life in prison. If they go this way, they could face, like, maybe you're going to face a malpractice lawsuit. But guess what? When you have malpractice insurance, you have to follow the law. You have to follow the law. You also have to follow standard of care. But if the law is against the standard of care, right, now you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And one of the questions your malpractice insurance asks you is if you followed the law, and also if you got legal counsel from the hospital's attorneys who said, don't do it. Do you think your malpractice insurance is going to defend you in court? No, they're not.
And that's the nature of what's going on in Texas hospitals. These doctors are being told, we won't protect you. We won't defend you. Like the hospital won't, your malpractice insurance won't. So what do? You're dangling.
And we also, literally, and the Kate Cox case, which happened, I think in 2022 to 23, Kate Cox and 20 something other Texas women sued the state of Texas to say we didn't get care. They weren't asking to overturn the state's abortion ban. They were asking for clear health exceptions and clear guidance. And guess what? Their case was decided against. Texas said, nope, not going to clarify anything. Now, is it Idaho or Utah? I get the two of them mixed up, but I think it's Idaho.
For all intents and purposes.
It's the same.
As someone that lived in Idaho for 4 years, same place.
Idaho. It is Idaho. So now women in Idaho are also suing the state of Idaho. Again, not to overturn the abortion ban, purely to say, hey, we're getting life flighted to Washington because we can't get care here, because your abortion ban says we can't get care here. So they're suing the state of Idaho not to overturn the ban, but to get clear medical exceptions in the ban. And do you know what the state's attorney said this week in court? It's Tuesday. He said it last week. I lied. What he said last week in court is, we can't give medical exceptions for infections. And they brought up these women that are dying of sepsis in Texas, right? The attorney for Idaho said, we can't do that. If we give medical exceptions for infections, women will go out and purposely step on rusty nails to give themselves an infection and claim they need an abortion. That's what they're saying about women. That's how much they hate you. That's how little they think of you. They're saying, look at these women that died of sepsis in Texas and Georgia. We don't want that to happen. And Idaho, it's going to happen because you're life flighting 2 women a week so they can avoid sepsis to Washington. Give us a clear health exception. And Idaho said, we can't do that because if we do that, you'll all go out and purposely step on rusty nails. I want to be joking. I'm not.
They don't trust us to make decisions for our own bodies. Like, that's how I say, like, how do we position this in debate, or like, how do we have to position it? You can't bring up that you're a woman. You can't bring up anything about it. You just have to say, hey, men, would you want this to happen to you? Do you want, it's this small, whether it's federal government or state government, do you want the government in your doctor's office? And the answer will be no if you position it like that. Do you want the government in your doctor's office? They'll say no, right? It's the same thing with gender affirming care. I can't tell you how many males I personally know, right, receiving gender affirming care, right? They're all on testosterone gel or testosterone shots. That is gender affirming care. Do you want your gender affirming care taken away? Do you want your testosterone supplements taken away? I mean, that's how, the only thing that matters to them is a selfish perspective, that, you know, their own perspective. I don't know how else to position it because they do not trust it. I mean, listen to that. They think we're going around and purposely Stepping on rusty nails.
just so we can have an abortion. I also think, so like Nevaeh, her case is a good one to look at. Also, Yenny Alvarez, who was really the first woman that died in Texas, who went completely under the radar. She had a lot of pre-existing conditions that made it really dangerous for her to be pregnant. And essentially the pregnancy ended up killing her, and her and the fetus both died. They should have offered her an abortion long ago. They should have offered to terminate the pregnancy, but they didn't. She left behind a husband and another child, right? Amber Nicole Thurman left behind a child. Candy Miller left behind a partner and multiple children. So I look at men and I'm like, you and your partner are going to have a baby. You're going to get pregnant. If something goes wrong, if something goes horribly wrong, and you have to make a choice between her life or terminating the pregnancy, what are you going to choose? And hands down, almost always, unless I'm talking to an extreme evangelical Christian, they say, well, obviously I would rather save my wife. Like, we already have kids. Like, I only have one wife. We can get pregnant again. If we're talking, especially if we're talking about a pregnancy that's like 11 weeks, 12 weeks, 17 weeks, right? Like, please save my wife. Then act like it. Because you can't sit here and tell me to my face that in a hospital, in an emergency situation, you would say, save my wife, when you don't frickin' act like it outside of the hospital. Outside of the hospital, you're voting for these abortion bans. You're voting for Republicans. You're voting to unalive your wife because you're not special, and neither is she. Neither one of you are the exceptions. And if you want proof of that, just look at beautiful, white, blonde Nevaeh Crane, who was a Christian.
And this is the third woman that was just reported by with ProPublica, where she was actually given like misoprostol, right? She's bleeding out. Like, this woman is excessively bleeding. They gave these cases, by the way, they gave the medical records to doctors that handle miscarriages, handle ABs all around the world. Like, a woman, I think it was a Harvard medical doctor who commented on this case and is like, you can't give misoprostol. But did the husband know? Right? This woman, she had she has two boys, right? They were hoping for a girl. But as a Black woman, she's scared of surgery. She's scared of invasive procedures. They didn't tell her a DNC is just suction, right? So they're largely confused. These are well-educated, upper middle class people too. Like, let's just say that, but they don't know. They're being told by an emergency room doctor at the point where she is hemorrhaging grapefruit size, right? She has been for 3 hours. They've changed 2 or 3 diapers, I can't remember which, of grapefruit size blood clots. She is bleeding out. And they're too scared in Texas to give a DNC. They move her out of the emergency room where there's less nurses on staff, which a nurse protests to and says, hey, she needs constant monitoring. How can we move her to a floor with less staff? Right? And the emergency room doctor comes and tells the husband, because she's slipping in and out of consciousness. He's shaking her to try to keep his wife conscious as she bleeds out. And the emergency room doctor is saying, oh, you can do misoprostol. That's fine. Which apparently experts say, no, you can't. Not when you're hemorrhaging. You have to suck. You have to do a DNC. You need suction so the uterus can close and the bleeding will almost immediately stop. No one told them that, though. So she continued bleeding and died.
And a DNC, y'all, like, it depends on how far along you are in pregnancy, right? But like, it's as easy as a 10-minute procedure. 10 minutes. That's it. Nevaeh Crane needed a 10-minute procedure. Candy Miller needed a 10-minute procedure. She would have gone home that day. These are outpatient procedures. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes if you're pretty far along, right? You go in, you have the procedure, you go to a recovery room, you kind of come out of the anesthesia. Most of the time you're in a twilight sleep. You come out of the anesthesia, they give you some crackers, they give you some apple juice. You sit there for a little bit, you're going to have cramping, you're probably still going to have a little bit of bleeding, right? but we know for sure that the uterus is cleaned out and clear, right? So we do know that you're generally not going to get an infection, right? There's always risk. With any procedure, there's always risk, but the risk is extremely, extremely minimal and small, right? 10 minutes and these women would still be alive.
That's all this woman was saying as she's dying is, I want to be home with my children. Please let me go home to my 2 children. I mean,
Yep.
that's the reality we're at. And then, like, I wanted to touch on this woman you told me about, which, God, is so disturbing. This woman, so sorry, my cat is screaming. If you can hear that's my cat screaming for attention. Mr. Mittens doesn't like to be alone. And we'll get to the Georgia situation as well, but these maternal mortality review boards, right, in these gerrymandered Republican states are now appointing people, actual anti-AB doctors, to the maternal mortality review boards.
So Texas is really special, as always, right? And we'll talk about Georgia. Like Felice said, Georgia just fired their entire maternal mortality committee after they came out and said these deaths were preventable as a reactionary measure. But in Texas, they have appointed one of the country's most extreme anti-abortion activists, who happens to be a doctor, onto their maternal mortality committee. And people on the committee are going, first of all, we hope that people don't think that this is the opinion of the committee. Her extreme views and her opinions do not reflect medical science and do not reflect the opinions of the committee. But that's her. Another really horrible thing that's happening in Texas, right? The CDC is one of the big places that tracks maternal mortality in the US. The CDC has a method of tracking it, and states are supposed to report their maternal deaths back to the CDC. That's how we get the big number, right? The national number for maternal mortality. We get it because the states collect their data, some of them not very well, honestly, because we don't have a very streamlined way to collect this data. So at the state level, they collect the data. It then gets reviewed by the Maternal Mortality Review Committee, the MMRC. And then, because sometimes you'll get stuff that's like a car accident. And then it'll, like, on the death certificate, it'll say, was this person pregnant at the time of death? Yes. But then that's going to get reviewed by the Maternal Mortality Committee and it's going to get thrown out, right? Because they're going to be like, this death wasn't due to pregnancy or exacerbated by it. It was an accident. It gets thrown out, right? Then those all go up to the federal reporting system. Texas is now going to opt out of the federal reporting system. They're saying, we're just going to track it at the state level. And we're going to decide for ourselves at the state level what deaths count towards maternal mortality. Guess what deaths aren't going to count? And which ones are going to be covered up and hidden? Deaths like Nevaeh Crane, deaths like Yenny Alvarez, right? So they're now going to opt out of the federal reporting system. And this is how they hide the deaths. This is how they hide people dying due to their abortion bans. They're going to withdraw from the federal system and they're not going to report these numbers anymore. And Texas is going to get to decide for themselves what gets to count towards maternal mortality. And it's not going to be anything that has to do with abortion.
Which is also happening with femicide across the world. Like the height, I think, of reporting was, I think it might have been 2018, 2019, which was 70 countries. And we're down to like 35 in 2023. Like the same thing is happening.
And I think it's worth noting that Texas is a massive state. They account for about 10% of births in the entire country. About 10% of all births are occurring in the state of Texas. So we're going to miss a giant capture of data. We're going to miss a huge capturing of data. And Texas numbers, which are some of the highest in the country for maternal mortality, will now no longer even count towards our federal maternal mortality rates because they're just going to be removed. So now our maternal mortality rate in the US is going to be artificially low. It's going to look like it's lower than it really is. And Texas just isn't going to report their numbers at all.
It's so disturbing. I was reading, and I think it's HCA, which is the largest hospital system in the country, right? And I can't remember what percent, and it's largely throughout the maternal desert, right? Where this is going on is where all their hospitals are, and they're not going to like I can't remember the statistics. I think I took a screenshot, but it's super disturbing, right? Because they're not going to support doctors. Oh, sorry, one second.
My husband, Ethan Stone, has genetically enhanced abilities. Because I saved his life once, he became obsessed with me, chasing me relentlessly.